Um, Today we are going to be presenting on Gutsy Gathering Collin Jarvis with Stealthbelt. Just a few things that we kind of need to go over. Give me a second so that we can get it pulled up. I'm Christine. I'm going to be y'all's host for today. Lindsay Auerbach, she's going to be our nurse leader. So at any time during the presentation, if y'all have any questions, feel free to send her a message via chat and she will be able to ask those questions to Collin at the end for you guys, so not everybody is asking all at once. Like I said a second ago, Collin Jarvis is going to be our speaker for today. He is the vice president of Stealthbelt. He also has an ileostomy as well, and he is a long distance runner. At the end of Collin's presentation, we are going to have breakout rooms. Our leaders are going to be myself, Catherine or Katie Vinn, and Lindsay Auerbach. Just a couple rules to go over. What is said in the meeting stays in the meeting. The differences of opinion is definitely okay. Use I language. So whenever you ask a question, it's okay for it to be, I'm experiencing this and things like that. It's also okay not to share. Do not feel like you ever have to speak or do anything. It's everyone's responsibility to make the group a safe place to share. Use the chat feature for any questions. One person speaks at a time. Share the airtime. Questions must be directed to Lindsay using the chat box feature. Just make sure that it says, whenever you pull up the chat box and you go to ask her a question, that it says Lindsay Auerbach privately, so that way it doesn't go to everybody. And headline your comments, and the group leader may interrupt you, just to give you guys a heads up. All right, Collin.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, Christine, and for everybody here that is joining us today. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you about, first off, my experience with having an ostomy and kind of sharing what that's been like, and what I've learned throughout that time about how to get active again with your ostomy, or if you're already active, how to kind of, what are some tips to make things even easier. And even if your goal isn't necessarily to go out and run a marathon or anything like that, I think that some of the things that I'm talking about today will hopefully be of value to anybody listening. So yeah, thanks again. So I'll start off, first off, like I said, telling my story. And I see a bunch of familiar faces. So for those of you who already know it, bear with me. Hopefully I've keyed it in a little bit better. But for the rest of you who don't know me, Christine had mentioned that I was a long distance runner. And that is definitely a true statement. Long distance running has just been a big part of my life for as long as I can really remember. That picture there was taken at my first national championship meet when I was 8 years old. So whatever it is about this sport, I was just drawn to it. I really developed a love for it because my dad was a long distance runner. And I think partly, if I were to pick one aspect of the sport that really stood out to me among all the others, because I was always interested in athletics in general, but with long distance running, it's kind of unique from other sports in that when you practice for it, there's not really like a field or rules. You just go out and run. And I think as a kid, and even to this day, the part that I like about it so much is that lack of structure, and it's all about kind of exploring, and there really aren't rules. You kind of do it for yourself. And, I think at a young age, I wasn't quite aware that that was something that drew me to it, but it just naturally, it resonated with me. And because I got started at it at such a young age, and I was lucky enough to have a natural gift and worked really hard, I was able to get my pick of the litter as far as where I wanted to go to school and take my athletic endeavors. When I graduated from high school, I decided to go to UC Berkeley and take my athletic talents there, because I thought that it was in the Pac-12, so it's one of the most competitive conferences, but it also was an academic challenge for me as well. And it was an incredible experience. And this photo is actually from my third year at Cal, where I won my first major championships in the steeplechase, which for those of you who aren't familiar with the steeplechase, what it is about a 2-mile race, a little bit less. But in that race, there are 5 big barriers per lap that you have to jump over. And one of those barriers has a water pit. So you're kind of like a human equestrian, just running around in circles for 2 miles, jumping over barriers. And I loved it. And, running was just a huge part of my life. It was tied up in my identity. And, even to this day, it's still a big part of who I am and what I love to do. But so like after this photo was taken, my goal, and it was really my goal ever since I was little, was to one day become an Olympian. So for people who are into track and field or long distance running, the Olympics is really kind of the highest level that you can go. There's not really like an NBA league or an NFL league. It's you become an Olympian. And in order to do that, the only feasible way to make that happen is to procure a sponsorship after college so that you can continue training as a professional athlete. Because the demands of a professional career in long distance running, there's just no way you could do it with a full-time job. But so that was my focus when I was in college. And it's not to say that I wasn't focused on like academics either, but my heart and soul was put into this sport that I had just grown up loving, and it had given back so much to me. As a part of my endeavor to getting to be an Olympian, I needed to make sure that my fourth year, my senior year in college, was a good one. Anybody who knows about the fickleness of becoming an elite athlete in the world of track and field knows that your last year is the most important for getting a sponsorship. So I was on the right path during this moment, but I still had a year to get through college and come out healthy and hopefully make enough improvement to attract the attention of some companies that would help me pursue my dream. So as a part of an effort to pursue that lifelong goal that I had, I spent the entire summer leading up to that year up in the mountains training at altitude. Now, I'm sure many of you have at least heard of the idea that endurance athletes will go up to the altitude where the air is a bit thinner and do their training there. So it is it's a way to build up more of your blood stores in your body so that you're just a more efficient athlete when you come back down to sea level. And I chose to go to Flagstaff where this particular photo was taken because it is really kind of the mecca of all distance running in the United States. So if you go to Flagstaff on a given day and walk around their small little downtown, their little coffee shops, and you see a bunch of kind of wiry, skinny, muscular looking people, there's a good chance that you're going to walk by at least a handful of Olympians. And I went there to rub shoulders with them. I wanted to see, what are the best people in the world doing and how do I stack up? And as a part of doing this, it was really something I chose to do on my own, and I saved up really all of my money that I had made just throughout my life and put it into this trip with the hopes that it would pay off later that season. And while I was in Arizona, things were going great. I was running upwards of 100 miles a week, and I was running with people who just recently qualified for the Olympics in the marathon. Of course, that's been postponed due to COVID, but they still had the qualifying race early this year. And, you know, I was running and training with that same group of people. While I was in Flagstaff, however, I started to get the first symptoms of what would eventually be diagnosed as ulcerative colitis. Now, I know that at least a handful of people here probably had ulcerative colitis that resulted in an ostomy, and the ones that didn't at least have a pretty good idea of what it is. But the early symptoms for me were I was starting to see blood occasionally in my bathroom trips, and it was becoming more and more frequent that I would have to ditch off into the bushes during a run to go to the bathroom as quickly as possible. It's just the urgency would kind of come out of nowhere. But other than those kind of more mild symptoms of ulcerative colitis, I didn't have any issues right away that rose any like huge flags for me. But as my time up in the mountains continued, it started to get in the way of my training a little bit, and I started to do some research as to like, you know, what's wrong with me? Maybe I thought it was hemorrhoids at first, like that could explain some of the blood. And when you're in altitude, sometimes your stomach does weird things. So some indigestion and stomach aches would not be unusual. And I was also, you know, at the same time running 100 miles a week, which can also do a lot of weird things to your body. So I kind of tuned all of that out until I noticed that the symptoms hadn't gotten any better. And then I did what every nurse, doctor, medical professional, and generally medically involved person hopes that a patient wouldn't do, and went to the internet for answers. So I went to WebMD amongst other places too, and started typing in all of the symptoms that I had. And after doing a little bit of reading there, I had sufficiently frightened myself enough to decide that it was probably a good idea that I go and get checked out. So my plan for that summer was to go from my time up in Flagstaff over in Arizona, and then meet up with my Cal Berkeley team in a different set of mountains over in California. But I left the mountains in Arizona a week early because I got squeezed in for a medical appointment. And at that appointment, I had a sigmoidoscopy, which is the sober colonoscopy. And they diagnosed me with what they called mild ulcerative colitis. Now, at that time, I had never heard really of ulcerative colitis. I knew what IBD was. I had heard of Crohn's, mainly just because of those Team Challenge jerseys that I'd see at the races that I would run occasionally, but I didn't know a whole lot about it. And when the doctor told me that it was mild, and they gave me some entry-level pharmaceutical options to try, and gave me a dietary guidelines for low residue diet to try, I figured that I would be able to knock this thing out no problem. In my mind, my whole life had been like solely around fine-tuning my body to be as efficient and healthy as possible. I mean, I took almost everything that you can imagine into account to do that. So like, it didn't even cross my mind that it wouldn't get better immediately. It was, in my mind, nothing more than a reason to avoid kale whenever possible, which I still do to this day, even though it doesn't give me any problems. But unfortunately, that is not how the rest of my story went. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here talking to you guys today. The rest of that story, in fact, actually, I did go back up to Tahoe, and this trip back to the mountains was not alone, but it was to visit and meet all of my former teammates and have a chance for us to train together, and also just be kind of a camaraderie trip as well. So it was about 3 to 4 weeks of time in the mountains right before school started, for all of the prior teammates to get together and all of the incoming freshmen to come in and meet everybody. And also, you know, I was the team captain at that time, so it was something that I had a big hand in organizing. And when it came down to making decisions about what we did throughout the day, it was kind of my show. So I felt personally responsible for, you know, making sure that it went well and that everybody got along, and that the the athletes that were there made the most of the experience, because I knew that the type of athlete that committed to run at UC Berkeley or other comparable schools wanted to be not just good, but great at their sport. And as the leader of those people, I felt personally responsible for at least a part of that. But while I was in Tahoe, I started experiencing more of the intense symptoms of ulcerative colitis. My fatigue levels were increasing, and that was easy for me to kind of blow off because I was still running very hard, very often. But I started getting really bad, sharp pains in my stomach, which had not happened before. And the bathroom visits were increasing both in number and intensity. And I was starting to miss out on workouts because of those things. And having just spent what at that time was my life savings on going to live in the mountains for a couple months and dedicating myself completely to honing this craft, it was incredibly frustrating for me to see that kind of slipping away because of something that felt largely outside of my control, because the change in my diet wasn't helping, and neither were the pharmaceutical options. And to compound the frustration of that athletic failure, like I said, I felt a deep personal responsibility for the people that were on that team. Like, those were all of my best friends in college, and to this day are still my closest friends. And I had a hand in convincing a good portion of them to come to Berkeley and run with me, because I wanted to build the program or help build that program out into something that was more successful. And, when I was unable to even kind of finish workouts with the team, when I was supposed to be the guy who on the previous year was number one, it just really had a serious effect on my mental state. But so the school year started, and I unfortunately never lined up for a race that year. So it to me felt like a massive waste, that whole summer of intense work that I had put in. And I lost 30 pounds on top of a frame that was already pretty thin, being a distance runner. I was in an incredible amount of pain and taking large amounts of opiates to control the intense cramping that I would get within my abdomen, and even had a lot of symptoms of depression and anxiety surrounding it, because it wasn't just a physical pain, but it was also, I was being stripped away from what my life was. Like, running was my identity at that point. Like, all of my friends were runners. All of the socializing that I did was at practice. It was a huge part of my life, and it was no longer available to me just because of this illness that had come so suddenly. And that was incredibly difficult. It actually, it got to the point where I had lost so much weight and had become so anemic that I was having trouble walking the half mile to class, and I needed to drop out of school to figure out what the next steps were for managing my symptoms. And to me, that just kind of was the cherry on top. I was 6 months before I dropped out of school, I was one of the top distance runners in the country, not even just in the NCAA, but I was at the very top of the game. And then I went to the point where I could barely walk myself to class without having to sit down and take a break. And to go from one extreme to the other so quickly, it really did pretty much break me. So I ended up getting a surgery scheduled to have an ileostomy, because I was just fed up with it. I couldn't deal with it. Every pharmaceutical option that was available at the time, I tried, and nothing gave me any relief, unfortunately. I had tried, I was fortunate to have all of the medical staff that UC Berkeley has available to it. I kind of had the ability to fast track that through the athletic program. So I really did try everything, and it didn't help at all. So I was ready to get the surgery, and I started doing my research, and I told the doctor, yeah, let's put it on the calendar, and we scheduled it for 2 months out. But just a week after I scheduled it, I went into the emergency room, which was probably the fourth or fifth time I had needed to go in to manage extreme pain. And the doctor took one look at me and did some tests and some procedures to see what the state of my large intestine was in, and recommended that I be put on the list for immediate surgery. And I went under the knife just the next day, pretty much. So this photo here is actually right before I went in to have surgery. And I look back at this picture, and it's hard for me to even relate to who that person was, because I remember kind of how I was feeling at that time and how much pain I was, but it feels like it was a little bit of a fog in a way, because it was just the lowest low that I'd ever experienced. And it was not a happy camper at that point. But I got the surgery, and I did have a few complications after the initial surgery, but after we got some of the infections that happened as a result of the surgery under control, I started to readjust to a normal life again. And during that time, I started being able to really reflect on my experience, because I had been in pain for so long that it was hard for me to really take a step back and assess everything that was going on from a kind of an objective standpoint. I was in survival mode, but now that I had had this surgery, I was no longer in pain. And so I was putting weight back on, and I was starting to physically feel better again. And I realized during that time that I hadn't really, that I had let this illness kind of completely beat me into submission. And it brought me back to this quote that one of my favorite professors at Cal Berkeley had told me, or really he told the whole class this, but it was something that stuck with me. And he said that only challenge produces the opportunity for greatness. And, when I first heard that, it was even before I got sick, but I wrote it down because I felt like something about it just resonated. And I liked the idea that you needed a challenge to overcome to achieve something great. And during that time of reflection after having surgery, I realized that I hadn't ever really been challenged in my whole life, and that all of these challenges that I had thought were there were really not challenges. I wanted to challenge myself to run a faster time or to place better in a certain race or whatever it was, but those weren't real life problems. Those were just things that I made out to be bigger than they were. But now a real life problem had come along, and I was not handling it well. I was not adjusting during those first few months to having an ostomy, and I was not willing to really go outside or socialize, and I felt like I was stuck. But I made the decision to challenge myself to figure it out, because I was only 21 years old at that time, and I knew that I had a long life ahead of me, that I couldn't bear to stay in that place for the rest of my life. So I made it a point to find my opportunity for greatness through that challenge. That started the first part of that mission that I set for myself was to just get outside my comfort zone. I wasn't sure if running in particular would ever be a part of my life again, at least not to the capacity that it had been. But I knew that I wanted to go out and push my physical limits again. So I just felt a little bit more confident. And for me, I decided to go to New Zealand on a backpacking trip. I had never been backpacking in my life, and I was woefully unprepared for what that actually meant, to be out in the wilderness for essentially 30 days with just one other person, and trying to figure out how to deal with an ostomy while doing that. But in my mind, I wanted to throw myself in the deep end and make sure that if I was able to find a way to swim in that situation, that I would be fine after that. And while I was over there in New Zealand, I found that a lot of that was the case. I was able to manage having an ostomy, even doing bag changes in the middle of the night, because more than half of the nights that we were there, we slept in hammocks strung up between trees. And I'll tell you that it's not easy to change an ostomy bag with a flashlight in your mouth and it's like 35 degrees. So don't necessarily recommend that. But for me, it was part of the healing process. I needed to know that I could be put in a challenging situation and come out on the other side okay. And beyond just the physical aspect, while I was in New Zealand doing the traveling, I met a lot of interesting people. And every person that I met who saw that I had an ostomy was extremely inquisitive and wanted to know more about my story, and was just shocked that I was out there doing such a crazy trip. And through those conversations that I had with them, I realized that a lot of the negative thoughts that I had regarding what it was to live life with an ostomy were things that I had put on myself, and that like anything that I thought other people were thinking was mostly wrong, and it was actually just me. And you know, that really kind of opened my eyes to what it meant to have an ostomy and like what the real challenge was. And it was, I look back, and while it was an incredibly fun, great experience, it was also one of the most meaningful personal development times in my entire life. So yeah, but eventually, and remind me at the end of this, I'm just not sure if we'll have time, but at the very end, if we answer all the questions, remind me to tell a couple of my favorite New Zealand ostomy related stories, because they're pretty funny. But for now, we'll move on. I just wanted to throw that out there for the end. But after I went on this trip to New Zealand, I did need to eventually reintegrate myself back into like the real world and finish up my degree, because I had not finished my degree. And I had started running again while I was in New Zealand, and was building up fitness and kind of testing, you know, what is possible. Do I think that I'm going to be able to run again? And when I got back to school, my coach said, "Hey, look, we've still got a spot for you on this team, and we're going to honor the scholarship that we promised you when you came here. And we know that that you love this, and we want the best for you. So if you want to give competitive running a shot again, the spot's available for you." And you know, I had of course had pipe dreams in my mind of maybe I could make a comeback of somehow, but I wasn't sure if I'd have eligibility. So when I heard that, it was music to my ears, and I was ready to give it a shot, because I felt like I really had nothing to lose. So now I'm going to show you guys a short little video that documented my first race back after 2 years since having the illness and surgery.
All right, here with Collin Jarvis. Collin, your first race in 2 years. How are you feeling?
That's the best 416 mile I think I've ever run. So 2 years ago, was the last time I raced. I guess a little less than 2 years, but it was in Austin. Ran the steeple. This is kind of the end of a lackluster season. I knew that things had been feeling off for that whole year, really. Yeah, a year ago today, I was laying in a hospital bed with plans to have my colon removed, large intestine. Yeah, at first it was just pain and a little bit of anemia, but as the summer went on, things never got any better. It's been a struggle since then to come back. Within, I think, 6 or 7 months of being diagnosed, I found myself in a hospital bed with a colon that was partially perforated and needed to have emergency surgery done. I was a different person. I looked like a little saggy gray skeleton. It was just not a pretty sight. I mean, a year ago today, JP, my old teammate, calling me and giving me updates on how the team was doing at MPSF. And that was hard. I mean, I wanted to be there. It's really hard to be laying in that position and watching all the people that I used to compete with, and my friends out there doing what they do, and being just totally hopeless. Initially, when I had the conversation, because I mean, the first question I asked was, "All right, well, am I ever going to be able to run again? Like, what's it going to be like when I come back?" And the doctors, she just told me like, oh yeah, you should be able to run again and go out for some jogs. And I was like, no, I mean, that's great, but that's not what I want. I want to compete. I didn't find anything about anybody who had tried to compete at a high level again afterwards. I guess I just assumed that no one had been able to. So at first that sounded like bad news to me, but on the other side, I started thinking about it. Well, maybe no one's ever tried. And when I started running, I had a PICC line, which is like a permanent IV line that goes in your arm, like near your heart. And so I had a little pump, like a portable pump with antibiotics, and I put it in a Camelback backpack. And I had that just kind of like makeshift, like taped around my waist pretty much. And I was just out on my old high school stomping grounds, cranking out 8-minute miles. I mean, it was hurting. There was no part of those like first couple months that were painful, but as far as I was concerned, I was out there, I was doing it. That was good enough for me. Since then, yeah, big turnaround. Say around November, things started clicking. Got the PICC line out, got rid of that drain, and after that, it was kind of like, all right, floodgates open. See what I can do.
Heat 3 of 3, the men's 1 mile here at MPSF.
So Collin Jarvis, you can see him on the track. The steepler phenomenon, but he has not run on the track in 2 years, people.
Yeah, very emotional experience for me. I'm excited.
The guy has gone through hell and back. I think now, granted, a medical hardship, but a very tough guy, and it's great to see him run on the track again.
Honestly, that was just done on a desire to compete again. I can't. After where I was, it's so hard to let it go, and I'm happy I didn't.
He actually has a cool little bag that he wears.
So yeah, I've got an Ostomy bag. It's in here. That's where I go to the bathroom. It's not a pretty thing, but it is what it is. If it wasn't for this, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I feel like I'm a totally different person, just from a running standpoint, from just a standpoint on life. I see everything in a whole new light now.
On the upside, it's probably an Ostomy bag world record, unofficial. Guinness, get back at me.
I realized that I love to win, but more than anything, I love to run, and I love the community, and that's what it's about. The competition side of it, that's great, and it's a big part of why I do what I do. But I found that it's more about just being able to do what you love, and chasing those goals, like whatever they may be.
So yeah, that was my first race back after 2 years. And like I said in that video, my perspective on why I was running and what it really meant had changed. And you know, I knew after I ran that race and after I finished that season, I knew 2 things for sure. One, that running was going to be a part of my life again, and that having an ostomy wasn't going to be the thing that changed that. And 2, that I wanted to be able to help other people get through that challenge more gracefully than I did. Because I knew that I struggled immensely with the psychological component of getting through, and also the physical component. I had my fair share of bad experiences during that recovery process, and I didn't know what form it would take, but I wanted to help people, and if there was a way for me to involve running somehow, then hey, even better. So when I graduated from Berkeley, I started a blog, and that blog was just basically kind of detailing my experiences and sharing information about what I was doing to recover and how I was able to continue running. And I spent a year after graduating college kind of pursuing a pseudo-professional running career, and ran some times that were pretty impressive given the circumstances. But eventually I came across an opportunity to partner up with some other people who liked what my blog had been saying and liked what my mission was. And we just got together and decided to start a company called Hurdle Barriers, LLC. And that was with the mission to improve the lives and well-beings of patients who've dealt with medical conditions and get them back to an active or fulfilling lifestyle. So for whatever that may be. And the hurdle barriers, our first initiative, it kind of serendipitously happened that Stealthbelt was looking for some help to grow and reach more people. And it was a product that I had used for now at that point over 2 years and loved, never went anywhere without it. And so when I had an opportunity to partner up with them through hurdle barriers, it was just awesome. And now I'm able to speak with groups like yourself and share my experience and some of the knowledge that I've gained over this time, in the hopes that it makes the challenges that come with having an ostomy just a little bit easier. So with all of that being said, now I'll talk a little bit more about what I've learned in specifically as an athlete and as an athlete who has an ostomy. So I'll start by saying that there are 3 main parts of this that I'm going to be talking to you guys about today. The first is going to be why I think having a support garment in particular is one aspect that makes getting active again a lot easier. I'm using Stealthbelt because that's the example that I know well. Of course, it's something that I sell, but there are lots of different garments out there, and you should do the research and figure out which one you think works best for you. So take my personal bias here into consideration, but I know that when I tried things out, that the Stealthbelt was what worked best for me. And when you wear a garment, it provides support for the ostomy bag. And I know that when I first started running and I didn't have any type of belt or garment to do that any amount of output that was in the ostomy would cause there to be a bouncing sensation, and that would just drive me absolutely crazy. Like I just couldn't imagine running like that all the time. And also to manage keeping the bag 100% empty all of the time just wasn't feasible, especially when the type of running that I did necessitated 1 to 3 hours of running at a time without stopping. So I needed to find a solution to that problem, because the bouncing and also caused tugging. And when I was if you mix the tugging of the appliance on the skin with sweat from working out, you're going to inevitably get irritation on the skin. And for me, I was getting those problems constantly. I had really bad skin issues at first, but the Stealthbelt actually pretty much solved that problem for me, because it stopped that tugging from all of the bouncing that I was doing and kept everything pushed against the body. And I just felt like that made a huge difference in my ability to confidently go out for a run and to work out. Of course, there's also some aspects of hernia prevention. I'm not going to talk about that too much right now because it's actually going to come back in later. But I just wanted to mention that when you have surgery and you are trying to prevent getting a hernia, that having a support garment is one of a multitude of different strategies that you should be looking into if you're going to be active for reducing the chances of getting a hernia. There is no silver bullet for hernia prevention. It's something that you've got to manage through a multifaceted approach. But like I said, I'll talk a little bit more specifically about that in a bit. But back to the idea of the support garment. For me, part of the hesitation of getting back into active again, beyond just the physical irritation of having an ostomy and getting that controlled, was also the kind of the appearance. And I at this point, it's been, what is this now? 6 years that I've had an ostomy. And I'd say that it's safe to say that anybody who even knows me a little bit knows that I have an ostomy. I'm not shy about the fact that I have it, and I'm not ashamed of it. It's not something that bothers me. But that being said, it also, I've thought about this a lot. It's just something that, while it is a part of me, I've never felt like I wanted it to be the thing that defined me. And, I kind of already said it, that I've considered myself as first and foremost as a runner. That's the part of the identity about myself that I'm most proud. So when it comes to finding some way to conceal the appliance, for me, that's really just a way for me to decide when I want to talk about the fact that I have an ostomy and when I just don't want to. Because if I'm out on a run and I want to run without a shirt off, I don't necessarily want every conversation that I have with somebody to be about a medical appliance. It's just, I get kind of tired of talking about it if that's like the first thing. And it is a part of me. And so to me, that was having it concealed psychologically kind of allows me to re-engage with some of the activities like that without having to kind of constantly be ready to like explain to somebody my medical history. When I'm talking to a group of people like yourselves that have ostomies, it's much easier to have this conversation. But I know that many of you probably have had a similar situation where you've had to kind of explain like, yeah, back when I was like 5 or 10 years ago, I was really sick and then I had to have this surgery, and then you have to explain what the surgery is. Like, during Ostomy Awareness Week, that's great, but day in, day out for 6 years, sometimes I just want to have it blend in. So that's another aspect for me. And then of course the support garments. If you're somebody who likes to be active in the water, when the appliances get wet, it's really nice to have something that can help hold the appliance against your body, because the adhesive of your appliance of any make, Hollister, Convatec, Coloplast, whatever, they're all made to be able to get wet. But while they're wet, it is possible for them to shift around and move a little bit. And when that happens, if any of the output gets underneath it, you're going to cause issues with your skin. So when you're in the water in particular, or if you've gotten really sweaty, it's really, I've found a good thing to have something applying a little bit of extra pressure to make sure that the ostomy doesn't shift and that none of those like minor leaks happen, because a minor leak later turns into a major leak. So that's what I'll say on the support garment aspect for now. The second part of suggestions that I would have for getting active again after having surgery is to really pay attention to your hydration. Now, I know that most of you are probably at least aware that having your large intestine removed in full, or at least in part, can have a serious impact on your ability to get your body hydrated. And I know that many people even have to get re-hospitalized. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but I think it's something like 30% of all people who have an ileostomy surgery get readmitted in the first 6 months to the hospital. And the number one reason for getting readmitted is dehydration. So that to me is just, it's clear that that's a problem. And when I was doing my research and trying to figure out like, okay, I'm going to have an ostomy for life, how am I going to make this manageable? The first thing I thought of was hey, hydration is going to be a problem. And I'm a long distance athlete. Like I'm an endurance athlete. Like hydration is a huge part of being successful when you're running for long periods of time. So with that, like kind of armed with that knowledge, I knew I needed to know as much about it. And I already had a pretty good understanding of how to stay hydrated just from my background, but I did some learning and I found out that the large intestine is actually responsible for up to 30% of our absorption of water. That's not to say that if you don't have a large intestine that you're always going to be at a 30% deficit. It's just to say that your body now has to kind of work overtime to make up that difference, and that you need to be diligent to make sure to know that you're at a disadvantage to a normal person. Specifically, that 30%, a lot of it actually comes from the food that you eat. So the large intestine, actually, there's a portion of the large intestine right towards the top where the small intestine meets it. I think it's called the duodenum, but I have to get fact checked on that one. And that portion of the large intestine is responsible for helping pull water out of the food that you eat. And most food does have some water content in it, but especially like fruits, vegetables, things like that, a lot of it will actually help hydrate you as you eat it. So if you have no large intestine, like many of us, it's you're now at a lack for that. And if you even get mildly dehydrated, you're going to feel a notable drain on your energy. You'll just be less energetic. You'll have decreased ability to think clearly. So the more dehydrated you get, the more kind of like foggy headed and difficult to remember things, and just you don't quite think as clearly as you normally would. And dehydration for people who have ostomies in particular can cause blockages. And I've had a couple minor blockages in the past, and they are not fun. And I know that there are likely people here who've had major blockages. And I'm not trying to imply that just getting hydrated is going to stop that from happening, but I am going to say that making sure that you're well hydrated throughout the day can do a lot to help prevent that from happening in situations where it's like on the fence. So that's a big part. There's also a lot of people who have IBD also experience joint pain and arthritic symptoms, just as another fun aspect of having a chronic illness. And again, like I said with the blockages, being hydrated is not going to be a silver bullet for solving that problem. But if you are somebody who has arthritic symptoms, it's well studied that being well hydrated is going to relieve some of the pain that you would experience from that type of arthritis. And then, of course, just more generally speaking, for anybody who's dehydrated, if you're not hydrated well, it's going to be more difficult for you to absorb nutrients. And of course, that if you're not getting the most of the food that you're eating, then you're just not going to be, your human machine is not going to function as well as it could. So that's another reason to make sure that this is an important thing to keep in mind. Some tips that I like to always share, and sometimes in the form of anecdotes, would be that like when you're hydrating your body, the way that it actually works is your body hydrates much like a battery charges. So if you've ever had your phone at like 1 or 2% battery and it's right about to die and you plug it into the wall, you'll notice that first 10 to 15% of battery life comes back really fast. But then as it gets closer and closer to 100%, it actually kind of slows down. And when you're thinking about rehydrating from a point of being dehydrated, your body works similarly. And the reason I'm telling you this is because if you chug all of your water at one time, so you've got your daily recommended value of water and you drink it all at one time of day, that's like just plugging in your phone for 10 minutes and expecting that to just solve the problem. But really, you need to be taking small frequent sips throughout the day and throughout really weeks and months to stay on top of and stay ahead of the hydrating process. And to that same point, that when I say that clear pee is not a necessary indicator of being hydrated, if you were to take another example, if you were completely dehydrated, you spent 2 days out in the desert with no water, and you get back and then suddenly drink a full gallon of water. I know that probably isn't healthy, but like you would pee clear directly after that. But your body doesn't have it's not that efficient at bringing that water from what you're drinking into the muscles and into the rest of your body and spreading it out. So you need to make sure that when you're hydrating, when you like narrow in on what your daily value of water is, like how much you should be drinking, the best way to drink it is to spread it out as evenly throughout the day as much as possible, because that will make a very distinct difference. And that's actually something that I learned from my coaches as an athlete, that they like make sure they drill it into you that you have a water bottle that's within arm's length at all times. And that's just, part of that has translated really well for me, at least, in terms of staying hydrated with an ostomy. So what are some actionable points for staying hydrated? Of course, educate yourself about the changes in your body. I gave you a little bit of a starter, but I encourage you to do a little bit more research and understand what it is that's changed by not having those pieces of intestine connected that you used to, and understand what it is to get rehydrated throughout that process. And then if I were to recommend supplements, there's generally not like one supplement that's going to be the solve all for everybody. Everybody's needs are going to be different, but generally speaking, the 4 electrolytes that you're looking for are sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium. And those are really important because they help your body actually move the water from your intestines into the rest of your muscular system. I included my 4 of the options that I regularly use: GOO, H2ORS, Pedialyte, and then the no sugar Gatorade G2. I always pick options that have no sugar. You can drink the ones with sugar. It's not gonna, you can still get hydrated through them, but it's generally just not as good for you. And usually when you have a hydration drink that has sugar in it, it's for being used during activities. So if you're actively running and drinking while you're running, then that one can have sugar in it, not gonna have any issues. You'll burn that off as you're moving. But for just throughout the day, I highly recommend the no sugar options. So find one that tastes good and spread it out throughout the day. Now, we'll talk about my third point, and that's actually posture and functional movement. And like I said, this is going to tie in a little bit to hernia prevention, but it's more generally, there's a lot of different reasons why I think that having good posture and moving in a functional way are important for us as people who have ostomies. When you think about what the process is that we all go through, having gotten sick and then needing surgery and then living with an ostomy, we are one of probably the worst posture groups of people out there imaginable. Because when you're sick and you're in pain with chronic illness in your stomach, what's the first thing that you do? You're going to kind of curl forward, just like if you have a stomach ache. And then if you spend a lot of time in a hospital bed, think about the position that has you in. You're kind of hunched forward. If you've had surgery in your abdomen, your abdominal wall is going to be cut into, and you're compromised there. So you're not going to be as strong. It's harder for you to hold your body up. And then, of course, there's also a link between your postural presentation and your mental health. So if you're somebody who has an ostomy and you're insecure about it, there's a good chance that you're going to try and lean forward and like cover that area. And then if you're depressed, people who are depressed, it's well documented that they will have bad posture because it's a protective posture. It's something that we do even subconsciously to kind of shield ourselves from the world around us. And so for all of these like different reasons, people who have ostomies have generally don't have the best posture. And I know that when I was coming back from having the surgery after those 2 years of illness and surgery, that was one of the biggest things that I noticed is like a physical change, that I had shrunk like 2 inches. I was always very proud of myself that I had managed to break the 6-foot barrier by like a centimeter. And when I went back to school and we did the annual physical checkup and they said, "Oh, you're 5'10" and a half." I was like, no, I'm 6 foot. And they're like, "No, you're 10 or 5'10". And I realized like, oh my gosh, like that is my back. I'm 21 years old and I feel like I have scoliosis now. And so like, there's obviously, that's kind of an extreme example. But I think everybody who goes through this process is going to have these compounding factors that just makes it more likely that that's the case. So what can you look forward to if you're able to fix some of these problems? Well, you're able to, one, there's going to be a notable stress reduction from having better posture. If you're constantly sore and achy, again, it's not going to be a guaranteed magical fix, but generally speaking, if you're moving in a way that your body is meant to be moving, it's going to be more structurally sound and you're not going to have as much soreness and pain. I put the picture of the Jenga blocks there because I like to imagine that my body is kind of like a Jenga block. And the more in line each of those blocks are with each other, the more stable that tower is. So when I'm standing upright and I'm aligned, that I'm going to be more structurally sound. But if I start leaning forward, then that's kind of like the Jenga blocks getting kind of moved out of place. There's more and more stress on those joints that is going to cause that kind of pain. So it can make a big difference there. It also reduces the appliance visibility. So if that's something you're concerned with, like the appearance of clothing underneath, or the appearance of the ostomy underneath clothing, when you're standing upright with good posture, you're kind of leading with your chest. It's almost like a slightly toned down version of somebody who's like over the top puffing their chest out. But when you do that, even when you're like really thin, the way your shirt falls, I found that it actually reduces the visibility of having an appliance underneath your clothing. So it's kind of counterintuitive because people try and cover it up subconsciously a lot of times, but it does seem to make a difference. At least that's what I found. Having good posture also allows you to breathe easier. And anybody who knows anything about anxiety or experiences it themselves, they know that the number one solve is to focus on your breathing. And I know that from my own experiences with anxiety. And the more I'm able to breathe easy, the less anxious I feel. And so this is just another small thing that kind of pushes you in the right direction. And then leak reduction. It's pretty unique, but you know, if you've got an ostomy and you're constantly bent forward at the abdomen and you've got bad posture, it's going to put a crease right where the ostomy gets applied to your body. And that can actually make it, you're putting more strain on that adhesive. So if you're standing upright and you're moving well, then your ostomy isn't going to crease in that part of your body as often, and it can actually help with leaks. And then hernia prevention. When I think about hernia prevention, I always think about how in the world, like Olympic weightlifters are able to lift like 5 times their body weight over their heads and not give themselves a hernia. Like, I know that those are professional athletes, but it's still crazy. And the simple answer to that is that they have perfect form, all of them. They move exactly the way the body was made to be moved. So for those of us who have ostomies, it can be in my opinion, I think that the best thing you can do for preventing a hernia is to work on the way that you're moving. So when you go to pick something up, or if you're somebody who wants to get active and you want to do weightlifting, don't overextend yourself, first and foremost. And 2, make sure you've got good form when you're doing it. So what I would say in this regard particular, as somebody who's not a medical professional, I'm not going to try and explain how to move this way, but I would say that if it's something that you feel like you can work on and that it can get better, that there are physical therapists out there who specialize in functional movement. And those are the people you want to see. If they know something about having an ostomy, even better. But generally speaking, that's going to be the type of person who's going to help you prevent a hernia more than anybody else, because you need to re-strengthen those core muscles, and they need to work in your body the way that they were made to be working. Also, I always say that when I first got back, I used postnatal C-section exercises for women to rebuild my core strength, because there's just a lot more of them out there, because there's a lot more C-sections. And I found that was a really great way to safely rebuild core strength. But just another suggestion if you're looking for that. And now as kind of a closing note on the importance of posture and functional movement, and also to my presentation as a whole, I want to ask everybody who's able to go ahead and stand up for a second. And when you stand up, I want you to, if you're not going to stand up, then at least sit up in your chair and give me your best posture and stand in a power pose. Something like you've just won an Olympic race, or you're Kobe Bryant winning your 5th championship, whatever it is. Just imagine that you've done something heroic and that you're showing the world. Now, I'm going to ask you to stay like that for about 20 or 30 seconds here. I've read multiple studies, one of which was from the Journal of Bodywork and Movement Therapy. And it showed that the posture can affect your emotions, and that your emotions can affect your postural presentation. So it's a symbiotic relationship. It works both ways. a cortisol study by psychologist Amy Cuddy actually showed that by assuming a power position for at least for just 2 minutes can reduce the levels of cortisol in your body by up to 20%. Now think about that. Just 2 minutes of sitting there with good posture can actually reduce 20% of the hormone in your body that produces stress. So you guys can all put your hands back down now. Thanks for playing along. But I always, this is to me, I think one of the most fascinating things that I've learned during this process, because if you imagine you live your whole life when you're, you know, if you've got a desk job and you're hunched forward, or if you, like, for any number of reasons, life has just kind of pulled you out of that good posture, your cortisol levels are just naturally going to be higher. And the other study that showed that your posture actually has an effect on your emotions. And simply by changing your posture, you can improve your emotional state. So when it comes to mental health issues, which I know are prevalent among people who have ostomies, I just can't, to me, it's a matter of a snowball effect, and having your posture there you can pick which direction you want things to snowball. And this is to me, an actionable thing that's a small piece. And again, I'm not saying that if you're dealing with depression that you shouldn't go and get help. You absolutely should. And if I could go back to Collin, who was sick right before getting surgery, that's the first thing I would tell him is go talk to someone. You need it. I know you do. But when you're looking for things to change, small things, this to me, the hydration and the postural presentation are just two aspects that can really make a big difference and just help you get active and live a better life. So, all right. That is my presentation. Thank you guys all for that. Now we're going to go into the breakout rooms. So I will put this screen up and let the 11 health folk take it from here.
Thank you so much, Collin. Just a heads up with the breakouts, if you want to join the breakout rooms, there's going to be a pop-up screen. Just press the join button on the screen and then share your experiences with the group. Again, it's okay to not share anything. And then at the end of it, you will be brought back into this main group.
Did have a follow-up though to that too, which I think is really good, is that you mentioned so many reasons for this support belt. As far as the degree of being active, if you're wearing it for activity, what about activities such as like you're cleaning your house or you're grocery shopping or you're just like walking the dog? Is that something that you would recommend wearing a support belt for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really happy that they asked that question, because it's actually like the majority of people who use stealth belts in particular are not weightlifters or marathoners. Like, we do have those people, and they're the ones that a lot of times you'll hear their stories because it's like, wow, I can't believe that happened. But most people who wear the belts are just looking to be a little bit more comfortable. And there are different options that will suit different needs for what you're trying to do. So like a lot of times people like to use support belts, like a stealth belt that's also concealment for things like intimacy. And even sleeping. If you're somebody who moves a lot in their sleep and you roll over on your bag, or you find that it gets caught because it's like loose, like free hanging, having something that kind of keeps it against your body can be a benefit. So the reasons for wearing a belt, in my opinion, go far beyond just the athletic active side. But since that was today's topic, that's kind of what I focused on.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm thinking back to a lot of people that have leaks at night and things like that, you know, do toss and turn. I think that could be something to look into.
Yeah.
Since we're on the belt, the question was, what is your favorite kind of stealth belt? I saw the 2 different ones shown, or are there more than the 2?
Yeah, I mean, so there's really, I would say 4 primary types and then a whole range of special custom ones. But I would say that it's kind of a tie. For working out, I use the Pro Style, which is the one that's adjustable. And so if I'm lifting weights, I can make it tighter. It's going to give me some of that pressure that I'm looking for. But for just day to day, like what I've got on right now, I use a slip on, and that one's not adjustable. So it's not something that I would use to go lift weights in, but it's what I use to support the weight of the bag and just keep it from needing to be tucked into my pants all the time. And you know, I use them equally in different situations.
So somebody is asking, so what are your running goals now? So it was something actually I was thinking of, because I feel like your story is, the end to your story is a little different now. Not that it's the end. So
yeah.
And then do you have any ever, you know, obviously setbacks and self-doubt now that, you know, you're running as a different person?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great set of questions. So I'll start with the first. My long-term running goal at this point is to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. There's a big difference between making the trials and making the actual Olympic team. So that I'd like to get back to the Olympic trials. I made it in 2012 on the track, but I'm not nearly as fast as I was back then. So now I'm going longer. And I just want to keep enjoying it. Yes, my experience with it has largely changed because, you know, there's other passions in my life now, like doing things like this, that have taken priority over the type of life I would need to live if I had even a faintest shot of like actually becoming an Olympian. I mean, that's a pipe dream for anyone who tries to do it. So yes, my goals have definitely shifted, but you know, I like I said at the end of the video, my perspective on why I run and what I'm doing with it has really changed. So have my goals. But I still am competitive. I'm a very competitive person.
Okay, so and question related to the recovery. So I think we saw your story obviously in pictures, but there was a big time gap, I'm sure, between surgery and you being back out there on the track again. So can you talk a little bit about the recovery as far as starting to run again? And then how did you know, like being able to identify, I'm going to go a little bit further today. How is my pain doing? Is this a setback? Is this soreness? Like feeling yourself out again?
Yeah. Good questions. I want to kind of preface my answer with a couple important things to consider. So if you're comparing yourself against me, these are some aspects that are crucial. I was only sick with ulcerative colitis for 8 months in total. And before that, I was coming from a point where I was about as strong as I really possibly could have been. So I think that aided in my overall recovery process. Whereas if I'd been sick for 4 or 5 years beforehand, that I would have had a longer time recovering. And also I was 21 years old. So I was at the age where if your body needs to recover from something, it's probably at its prime, because I'm not really growing anymore, but I'm at the peak of my body's ability to adapt. So I think that those two aspects do influence my answer. And that my answer is that I was gradual with the way I built up. I started off very slow. I literally was there doing postnatal exercises on YouTube for a few weeks. But when I started running again, I just listened to my body as much as I could. And I didn't run through anything that was like muscular pain. It was more like, you know, just pain of being out of shape. But I was just real slow about it. And just kind of, I don't have any other better answer other than I just listened to my body. And I know that I made it a rule for myself that if I was always one step back from what I thought I was capable of doing. So if I felt like I could go run X number of miles, I would run X minus 1 and stay there until I was absolutely confident. And that was enough for me to get through those worrisome first 6 to 8 months of rebuilding that I felt confident kind of opening the floodgates.
That's a great answer. Okay, I think this might be the last one, but if you guys have more questions, send them. There's a lot of really good questions. What was the hardest part of your recovery psychologically?
Admitting to myself that I wasn't okay. Because I have always been a very prideful person, and to admit that I was struggling to adapt to a situation that I felt like I should have been able to handle. It took me a long time to admit that there was something that I couldn't fix on my own. So I'd say that was probably it. And it wasn't really specifically tied to what I thought about the way it looked or anything. It was just generally, I refused to allow what I perceived as weakness in. And it took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that that's not really like that admission is not one of weakness, that it's like, it's a vulnerability, which is different. And that there's a different type of strength involved with addressing that type of problem.
I love that. And it's still, I think, recognizably okay, you know, that it's hard to say that.
Yeah.
I used to say to my patients all the time, it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, and I still have, you know, there are days now, it's six years in, there are some days where it's just like, I just want to rip this stupid thing off. Like, you know, I don't want to try and paint a picture that it's like, oh, I figured it all out. It's done. No, that's not true. But I think like as time goes by, those days are fewer and fewer, and the intensity at which it happens, I'm able to conceptualize. It's, you know, it's all about like, there's like the 3 P's. It's patience, perseverance, and perspective. So you just have to be willing to be patient with yourself, and in that process, you have to persevere when things are bad, and trust that if you make it through one period of time, that there will be a better period following that. And you have to have the perspective to be able to look at, where am I now versus where could I have been? Like, what are my alternatives? And like, how much worse could things get? And like, how good are things now? And like, you know, you can look at, it's like the old, like overused adage of half empty, half full glass, but like you've got a glass, and like how you look at it is kind of up to you. But at the end of the day, it's like, you still have that glass, and it's either half full or half empty. And that's a decision, you know, and you're not always going to make the decision that it's half full. You know, there's going to be those half empty days, but you know, it comes with the territory. So, yeah.
All right, I'm going to close with this last one, because I think coming from a young college guy too, maybe this is helpful for a lot of people, but you had your ostomy at a young age. How was it dating?
I wish I could give you a good answer to that, really, but I was a fortunate person in that the girl that I started dating right when I got diagnosed was there throughout the entire process and is now my wife. So I never dated with an ostomy. I was lucky. I acknowledge that is probably a very challenging thing to overcome in those early days that I don't have any experience with.
Yeah. All right, guys, those are all such good questions. This was amazing. I'm going to pass it back off to Christine for some closing comments. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Thank you so much, Collin, for all of your wisdom, insight, and empathy. Also, thanks to everyone who joined us today and helped make our Gutsy Gathering such a success. We hope you'll all join us in the future for the next one and the one after that. There's definitely going to be several. 11 Health was started by a patient to help other patients, and that sense of purpose continues to run through everything we do. Gutsy Gatherings is here to support patients. It's an extension of our much loved and rapidly growing patient coach program, which supports patients across the US. The PC program and nursing program, as many of you know, is part of our Smart Care service to patients. It's what we call Alfred Smart Care. Alfred Smart Care now includes Smart Bag 2. I will spare you the detailed functional benefits of the breakthrough bag, but what I can say is that it gives ostomates the most advanced, most personalized care possible. It tests with Smart Bag 2 the likelihood of an acute event occurring within 30 days of ostomy surgery, where around half compared to standard bags, and visits to the ER and hospital readmissions were both greatly reduced. As I say, the patient benefits are numerous for all of us and encourage you all to test it out. It's so much more than just a bag. In the next few hours, we will send you a questionnaire on the Gutsy Gathering. Please complete it. It will help us make future events better and allow us to help even more patients. You will also receive an email with more detailed information on the Alfred Smart Care and Smart Bag 2. Please follow the easy registration process. We want all of you to join the 11 Health family and be a part of our collective journey to transform patient care, one patient at a time. Again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And again, thank you, Collin, for joining us and being such a great speaker today for us. Thank you.
Thank you guys. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, Collin.